The cool breeze rushed in, causing Jolien to beat her spirits. She found herself standing in a simple courtyard, surrounded by fences. The broken house in front of her had apparently lived for a long time. The blue bricks above had lost its original color, and were dusty with cracks. And she was holding a rough white porcelain bowl in which was filled with black medicinal soup, exuding a strong, pungent bitterness. Jolien's head was in chaos, her thoughts were entangled in a ball, and she couldn't sort it out. She didn't understand how she got here. A few breaths ago, she was clearly pushed down the dry well by a few greedy clansmen and fell to death. There are no wounds on the body? There was a hoarse yelling and cursing in the room, full of breath, but with a touch of fatigue. Jolien secretly guessed that the medicinal soup in her hand should be prepared for the person in the room. After hesitating for a while, she stepped into the door, and when she saw the young man tied to the wooden chair by hemp rope, it did not belong to her. His memories flooded over like a flood. Raising his hand to cover his stinging forehead, Jolien's back was pressed against the cold door panel, a trace of stunned expression on his beautiful plump face. This body has the same name and surname as her, and it is also called Jolien, but it is not the self who grew up in Peking, but the Huan Zhou clan of the Great Zhou dynasty. This year is only 16, and it has just been a year since he married the Huan family. After being transferred to the capital, she became a widow because she was killed in the paddock for guarding the nobles and hunting. 28 years is the best time for a woman, just like a flower bud that just bloomed, delicate and beautiful. The Huan Zhou family had no affection for Huan Jin at first, but he decided to get married since he was a child. At this time, without the restraint of her husband, she acted more and more with waves, and secretly met with a rich man in Bianzhou city. The rich man's name is Yu Man. Yu's family is a medicinal business and has a lot of wealth. The beauty of the Huan Zhou family he likes wants to get people to play with him. However, the original body is well versed in the truth of waiting for the price, did not easily let Yu Man succeed, and now he is still hanging, trying to marry Yujia as a young grandmother. Huan Shen is Huan Jin's own brother and Jolien's uncle. Both of the brothers worked as guards in Bianzhou. A nearby village and town had a seasonal epidemic. The officials ordered the guards to seal off the village and sent a doctor to treat the disease in a timely manner. Huan Shen did not contract the spread of the disease. It's a pity that the original body is the most cherished life, and I still don't worry. I went to the drugstore to buy medicinal materials to prevent the epidemic. The medicinal soup was boiled on the stove, and Huan Shen refused with disgust. Huan Zhou's eyes flushed immediately, taking advantage of this person's exhaustion and falling asleep, he took the twine to tie him tightly, and there was no room for escape. The porcelain bowl she is holding now is not a soup medicine that can prevent and cure, but an arsenic cream that can make people pierce the stomach. Yu Man, the young owner of the drug store, threatened the buddies in the store and exchanged the medicine package. Therefore, the original body didn't know it, and poured the boiled arsenic cream into his uncle's stomach, almost killing people. Fortunately, Huan Shen had a big life. After drinking arsenic, he soon vomited and bleeds. The original body found that the situation was not right, so he hurried to the doctor and treated him in time. This saved Huan Shen's life. Even if it made such a big mistake, the original body still didn't learn to be smarter, and still went its own way, still very stubborn. When Huan Shen fought with the army, she betrothed Huan Yun to a wealthy family in Bianzhou. Huan Yun was unwilling to marry, and she knelt on the ground for several days and begged, but did not let the Huan Zhou change her mind and was forced into the sedan chair. Sent to the magnificent mansion. The original body thinks that he is the most benevolent to the sister-in-law and can also make up for the mistakes he has made. How can I expect that less than a month, there will be bad news? Huan Yun is gone. The wealthy man is old and poisonous, and likes the young and tender girl the most. After she married, Huan Yun was beaten day and night despite her name as his wife. Even the servants verbally abused her, making Huan Yun weak. In just 1 month, the fragrance disappeared. Originally Huanmia was very good to the original body, but after her daughter's death, she finally woke up and hated the original body to her bones. It didn't take long for her to be too distressed and depressed. Huan Shen, who was in the army, became a prestigious Zhenguo Gong a few years later and returned to Bianzhou, where he was imprisoned in a dark prison and tortured to death. This extra memory in his mind shocked Zhou and his eyes were round. She also went to school, studied, and knew that there was no such dynasty in history. Everything here belongs to the script that she had read before. There happened to be a wicked woman surnamed Zhou who poisoned her uncle. The sister-in-law gave it to an old and poisonous member to play outside, probably because he had done too many bad things. In the end, Zhou's was retributed, and he couldn't die anymore. Zhou lowered his head, his eyes fell on the hot soup bowl, and then he looked at the hideous youth who was not far away. He was obviously the Huan Shen in the script. Not long after Zhou read the script, she was harmed by the clansman. Therefore, she remembered the contents of the book very clearly, knowing that after Huan Shen became the famous lord of the town of Zhou, he was killed by the Huan Zhou clan when she was young. After the arsenic was poured, the root of the disease was dropped, and he died violently in the first year of his establishment. Calculating the time, Huan Shen just killed the Huan Zhou clan to avenge his sister, and he lost his life within a few months. Zhou lived in the Republic of China. She has experienced wars and blood separation. Although the Lord Zhenqiu in the dialogue is a bit distressed, she is unwilling to hurt the soldiers who protect the people. Therefore, she puts the medicine soup in the bowl without thinking about it. Fell to the ground. As soon as Pai Shuang touched the ground, many bubbles and hissing noises appeared. Zhou felt a little strange and didn't understand what was going on, but Huan Shen, who was struggling endlessly, felt like a mirror. He didn't expect that Zhou's heart was so cruel, and in order to fly with Yu Man Zhuangsu, he used poison to murder himself. The reason why he knew this was because Huan Shen happened to encounter a case when he was escorting prisoners with the government. A small concubine from a wealthy family bought arsenic and planned to murder his mistress. Turning over, bubbles appeared on the ground, and no one knew that the seemingly common medicinal soup was highly poisonous. Although Zhou had never seen Pai Shuang, she caught a glimpse of Huan Shen's sudden face. She secretly said something was wrong, knowing that she had taken this step wrong, and should not pour out the medicinal soup in front of Huan Shen. At this moment, she was breathing rapidly, walking vainly to the youth, pointing to the water stain on the ground, and asked in a trembling voice, "What's the matter? This medicine is so strong, how can anyone who drink it can bear it?" Hearing the guilty conscience in the woman's words, Huan Shen couldn't help but sneered. When the eldest brother left Bianzhou, the wicked woman had already followed Yu Man's eyebrows and had an affair. When the news of her eldest brother's death came, she became even more intensified, and she had a private meeting with Yu Man in the ruined temple not far away. Although Huan Shen felt aggrieved in his heart, he did not intervene. After all, the Zhou family had just turned 16 and was a few years younger than him. If he were to spend his entire life in the Huan family, it would be too difficult for others. I never thought that Zhou not only did not obey the woman's way, he was promiscuous, but also tied his 5 flowers, wanting to murder. Such a spicy intestine, it is simply chilling. He stared at the woman close at hand. Huan carefully gritted his teeth and asked, "Zhou, you and my eldest brother had a marriage contract since childhood, and you were willing to marry the Huan family back then. No one is persecuting, so now you do this. Are you worthy of your conscience for the murderous evil?" Zhou, who accepted the original memory, knew that what Huan Shen said was the truth. The original birth mother was driven out of the Zhou family, and her father married a stepmother. Therefore, the life of the original body in the Zhou family was extremely difficult. Even if she knew that Huanjin would soon be transferred to the capital, even if she was married, she was still a living widow. She still had no hesitation. The purpose of marrying is to completely sever contact with the Zhou family. Neither the original body nor the current Zhou had thought of murdering Huan Shen. If the medicine package had not been replaced, the tragedy would not happen at all, so she would not admit it. Slowing his mind, Zhou calmly said, "Uncle, you have misunderstood." Misunderstanding? If you really didn't know, you wouldn't pour the medicinal soup on the ground. Although Huan Shen is a brother, but his temperament is completely different. One is gentle and considerate and understanding, the other is very suspicious. Careful thought. Zhou sighed, knowing that she couldn't resolve Huan Shen's suspicion in a few words. She stared at the sweaty youth on her forehead, took a dry soft cloth from the wooden frame next to her, turned and walked back. "I'll wipe it for you, you have a lot of sweat. If you are blown by the cold wind, I'm afraid you will catch the wind chill." Huan Shen felt annoyed, and his expression was ferocious, as if he was about to eat people. Although his hands were tied, his body was still able to move. With a sweep of his arms, he threw the soft cloth on the ground, stained with a lot of mud. The young man raised his head, his overly bright eyes fixed on Zhou, his black eyes burning with anger. The woman's unstretched thin eyebrows frowned more severely, picked up the soft cloth, changed another one, lifted the young man's chin covered with black stubble, and carefully wiped it a few times. Huan Shen is nearly 9 feet tall and has been a guard in Bianzhou for nearly a year. His strength is not small, but now he is firmly bound by hemp rope, and he can't use his strength at all, and he can't resist this woman. When the sweat stains on the young man's forehead disappeared, Zhou bent down, untied the hemp rope wrapped around his wrist, took the soiled soft cloth, rubbed it in a tub, and then walked out of the hut and left the rest of the house. All the decoctions were turned out and stuffed into the stove in twos, the tongue of fire rolled and burned completely. Sitting on the bench, Zhou was at a loss. She didn't know where to go. In the Republic of China, she was the owner of the Zhuajia winery. The Koya wine brewed was famous all over the world. If it weren't for the recipe of the Koya wine, the tribe elders would not take advantage of the chaos in the city and bring people to the wine shop and bring her there. The icy wellhead threatened. Zhou didn't want to let these shameless and despicable villains get a prescription, and simply struggled desperately, and finally fell alive and died in the dry well, and came to the Zhou dynasty by accident. In any case, she has lost her life for nothing. Zhou was in a trance. When she heard a sound of footsteps coming from behind her, she turned her head and found an 8 or 9-year-old girl standing at the door of the kitchen. Her face was only as thin as her palms, and her hair was dry and yellow. His complexion was pale, even the color of his lips was very light. The little girl looked at her timidly, and remembered the scolding that came from her second brother's room. Zhou was stunned. She never thought that the sister who was killed by the gangster at the age of 10 would appear in front of her alive. She was so small and so immature that she shouldn't die under the rifle in order to save herself. She should live well under the gun. "That's right. Sister-in-law." Huan Yun called out in a low voice, wondering why Zhou showed a look that looked like crying but not crying but not laughing but not laughing. The sister-in-law's temperament is always so popular that she always feels that she is very in the way. Sometimes when she speaks slowly, Huan Yun will be disgusted. But today is a little different. Not only did she no longer look at herself with disgusting eyes, but instead her eyes were red, covering her mouth with her hands, as if she was about to cry. The little girl is the most kind-hearted, even if she is a little scared of Zhou. She still walks forward at this time, holding the woman's arm and asking, "Sister-in-law, are you feeling sick? Or did the second brother anger you just now? When the wine shop comes back, you will definitely teach the second brother a good lesson. Don't be angry." Huan Yun remembered clearly that when the news of the death of her eldest brother came back from Beijing, her mother was crying, and she asked her to let her sister-in-law, saying that the Huan family couldn't stand her, causing such a young girl to be a widow and suffer. Pointing, if the family does not tolerate it, she is afraid that it will be even more uncomfortable. According to the content in the script, Zhou body will eventually be skinned and boned by the Lord Zhenguo, and killed by the most cruel means. She didn't want to harm people or be harmed, so she thought about finding a suitable opportunity to move out of Huan's family. Anyway, her husband is gone, and her mother-in-law is kind and will not stop her at all. Just avoid the evil spirit with Huan Shen. Star contact, the tragedy in the book will not happen. However, Zhou vision was very good and perfect, and he could hardly find anything wrong, but unexpectedly he would meet his younger sister who passed away early in Huan's house. She and Yuner were adopted by the Zhou family when they were ignorant, but unexpectedly, when they returned to Beiping from Fengtian, they encountered a few gunmen. The Zhou family ran away on their own, and no one could care for the two young adopted daughters. She took Yuner's hand and tried her best to escape, but was chased by the gangster with the rifle. The man wanted to kill himself, but was pierced in his eyes. He yelled with pain and shot him. She should have been the one who died, but Yuner stood in front. Long-lasting memories continued to emerge. Zhou couldn't help trembling. He hugged the thin girl in front of him and choked with sobs. Hui's eyes are lost, Yun Niang doesn't have to worry. Even with turbulent waves in her heart, Zhou emotions quickly calmed down. She has been the boss for more than 10 years, unlike a really young woman who can't control her emotions. Feeling the tightness of the little girl in his arms, Zhou pursed her lips and slowly released the person. In the coming days, Fang Chong, she has a chance to get along with Yuner, there is really no need to rush for a while, otherwise it will scare people. What should she do in the future? Guru. A bellowing sounded in the kitchen. Huan Yun felt extremely embarrassed, her face flushed red, and she hurriedly covered her belly with her hand to avoid screaming again. Sister-in-law, I remember that there are still some buns left in the morning, and I can still pad a pad now. Huan Yun said in a very small voice, if you don't listen carefully, it's easy to ignore the past. No. Zhou bluntly refused. She remembered that the meat buns had been made for several days. In order to store them for a longer period of time, they were all fried in a large amount. Wire, if you eat this kind of thing, Huan Yun's small body will definitely vomit and diarrhea. The little girl lowered her head sadly. She must have made a mistake just now. The sister-in-law has always regarded her as a drag oil bottle. How can she look at her with loving eyes? In fact, she was not that hungry, so she could bear it a little longer and wait until the mother came back from the wine shop. Zhou received the memory of the original body, using the original body's shell, except for the core, nothing else changed. She walked to the shady barn, took out pig liver, pork belly, kidneys, etc. from the water tank, put them in a wooden basin, and brought them directly to the kitchen. Seeing the pig offal in the basin, and then at the woman with blood in her hands, the little girl's complexion was slightly blue, as if she was frightened. Zhou didn't mean to open his mouth. He put the liver, belly and kidney on the cutting board with a knife, and cut them into thumb-sized strips. The Huan family in the script is the original husband's family, while the Zhou family is her natal family. The two families have known each other for a long time and both run a wine shop. In recent years, the Zhou family's reputation has grown, and after the death of Huan's father, the Huan family's business has plummeted. None of the Huanjin and Huanshen brothers inherited the craftsmanship of winemaking. They all became guards selected by the government in the first year. First guard in Bianzhou, and then be deployed to Beijing on duty the following year. Therefore, although Huan's family is a merchant, there is not much money available at home. Huan's mother saves everything and does not buy good pork. Instead, she picks out some stick bones and pig offal that no one wants, so she can spend less money. There was still some white porridge left in the morning. Zhou brushed a porcelain jar, scooped the white porridge into it, and cooked it on the stove. The action was very neat, as if he had done it thousands of times. Huan Yun couldn't help but walked a few steps forward. It has been more than a year since his sister-in-law married to Huan's family. She had never seen her cook, and she did not expect her cooking skills to be better than her mother. "Sister-in-law, shall I help you?" Seeing Jolien busy working alone, the little girl couldn't help but feel a little guilty, but unexpectedly the woman waved her hand without looking back. "You just sit in peace, and the pig congee will be ready later." This pig congee was learned by Jolien from a Chaozhou cook. After she became the owner of the wine shop, she had to study the wine recipe every day to make the Koya wine a higher level. "There are so many restaurants in Peking, she apart from wine tasting in the store, I will also taste some delicacies." Peiping was once the capital city, and people from all corners of the country have people from all over the world. Some customers love the taste of Koya wine, frequent the wine shop, and gradually become familiar with Jolien. She has also learned a few skills, and the cooking skills are not superb. It is a bit better than ordinary people. The pig offal was placed in a cold water tank, and some dust was stained in the end. Jolien washed it with clean water and then soaked it. He took salt, sugar, and other seasonings and put it on it. Going to the red cloth, seeing the muddy wine soup inside, frowned. Even though she knew that most of the drinks in the Great Zhou dynasty were muddy, and the sake was expensive and the amount was small, but when she saw the white wine brewed by Huan Mu, she looked sad, poured some in a small bowl, and measured it with disgusting eyes. "My sister-in-law has been staring at this jar of wine, but something went wrong?" Huan Yun asked suspiciously. Jolien shook his head and secretly said in his heart, "No wonder the business of Huangjia winery is getting deserted day by day. Even if the brewing method of turbid wine is very simple, the taste of this altar of wine is not good, the color and luster are turbid, and there is almost no fragrance at all. Take out the pig offal soaked in water, pour some wine, rub it repeatedly with slices to remove the smell of the meat itself, and then put it in the rolled white porridge. As soon as the hot porridge water touches the pig offal, a strong fragrance will spread. Because the rice glue at the bottom of the porridge is extremely viscous, it can firmly wrap the offal and keep it fresh and tender." Standing next to the stove, Huan Yun couldn't move at all, staring straight at the bubbling pork congee. She didn't expect that this kind of goods could be so delicious. The fragrance grew stronger and stronger, overflowing from the small kitchen, swirling in the wind, and spreading to Huan Shen's house. Even if the body is extremely exhausted, the man dare not continue to sleep. In case Zhou Shi takes advantage of his unpreparedness and repeats the same technique, he will be with hemp rope, and the arsenic will be poured hard. The feeling of powerlessness made Huan Shen extremely anxious, with bloodshot eyes and an indescribable look. This stall smelled the strong scent, and instead of calming down, his mood was a little more vigilant. Counting the time, my mother hasn't returned from the wine shop, and the people cooking in the kitchen except Zhou Shi did not do what he thought. This woman was the most lazy in the past, she didn't know how to cook at all. Today is so abnormal. Is it because she wants to poison her food and harm her whole family? Huan Shen's complexion became more and more gloomy, he turned over and got out of bed, and walked quickly to the kitchen. When he saw his sister who was holding a spoon in her hand, scooping porridge into her mouth, he sternly yelled, "Lay down." The little girl was already timid. Seeing the second brother's complexion with blood-red and bulging veins, her heart trembled with fright, she hurriedly put the dishes aside and couldn't help swallowing her saliva. Seeing Huan Yun's pale face and slightly horrified eyes, Jolien was indescribably distressed. She was very clear about Huan Shen's thoughts. It was nothing more than speculating on her with the greatest malice. After all, arsenic had been put in the medicinal soup just now. When he walked to the edge of the table and sat down, Jolien picked up the soup bowl, blew the heat on it, and ate half a bowl of pork congee one bite at a time. Then he raised his head and stared at the young man in front of him. "Uncle, there is no poison in the porridge, what are you afraid of?" Huan Shen was choked and didn't know how to argue, so he could only stand still and motionless. Huan Yun looked at her sister-in-law with blank eyes, her hands covering her abdomen, her eyes flushed with grievances. Fortunately, Jolien chose a large porcelain jar. Just now, she was afraid that the little girl would be starving her stomach, so she served a bowl in advance. At this time, some wolfberry leaves were added to the porridge, and white radish juice was added to improve the freshness. The aroma was almost it makes people salivate. Huan Shen pursed his lips at the eyes of his sister's accusation, and didn't say anything. When the porridge bowl was placed in front of Huan Yun, she didn't care about it being hot. She blew it hastily and swallowed it in with her mouth wide open. It took a few mouthfuls before she slowed down. Although Jolien's cooking skills are good, he can't make Huan Shen let go of his vigilance and guard. He is like a beast hunting, his back is tight, he stands upright in front of the table, his handsome face is not half soft. Jolien couldn't face it with a normal mind, and he could only lower his head without saying a word, busy with the things he was doing, avoiding the sharp and compelling gaze of that person. When people are hungry, even the dry food without any condiments will have unspeakable sweetness. What's more, the pork porridge is delicious. With the addition of wolfberry leaves, the fragrance of vegetables will be incorporated into the porridge. The taste is richer and more layered. At this moment, Huan Yun ate without raising her head, looking from the top to the bottom. She could clearly capture the blush from the base of her ears. After drinking a bowl of porridge, the little girl raised her head and looked at Jolien with wet eyes, repeatedly admiring, "Sister-in-law, your cooking skills are so good. I have never had such a delicious porridge before." Jolien touched her furry head, but didn't take this seriously. She had just arrived in a strange place, confused and feeling no hunger at all, so she sat on the long bench and rested in a daze. In the Republic of China, the Zhuajia restaurant was next to a church. A Lady Li who had returned from abroad often went to the church to pray. Sometimes when she met Jolien, the two would talk a few words. Ms. Li has drunk foreign ink. She is also a knowledgeable and educated woman. Jolien is very envious of her. He always asks her about Western stuff. I heard that they used foreign fire, foreign nails, and even foreign horses. The boat crossed the sea and was transported to Peiping by carts and horses. The outside world is extremely vast, but Jolien is confined in the wine shop. He is accompanied by fine wines and wines every day. Although it is not lonely, he is curious in his heart. When she got acquainted with Miss Li, the young and loyal girl showed her a notebook that she had written, saying that it was written while studying in Great Britain. They didn't know each other at that time, and there was a supporting actor with the same name and surname as Jolien in the story. Earlier, Miss Li had voluntarily mentioned that the name of the Huanzhou family in the script should be changed to avoid awkwardness, but Jolien didn't care about these details and didn't want to cause her trouble, so she simply refused. Now think about it, if she had changed the name of the supporting role, she would have died in the dry well in winter, and it would be impossible to see her sister who died young. Now Huan Shen sits in front of the woman, looking at her stunned, guilt-free virtue. For a while, his eyes are colder, like the frost of 1949. Jolien didn't notice the youth's gaze at all. After another 2/4 of an hour, there was a sound of footsteps outside the kitchen. She raised her head and saw the thin and dry woman walking forward. She was wearing indigo-colored clothes, dry and black. The hair is made of wooden hairpin. Although his face is old, he can see the delicate outline. Who else can there be if it's not Huan Mu? Mother! Jolien called out, stepped forward and took Huan Mu's arm, led people to the table, and said softly, "I have cooked a pot of pig porridge. You have been busy in the wine shop all day, but the hardest thing is. Eat something quickly to warm your stomach. Pork waste can nourish the kidney and nourish the waste. Pork liver can replenish qi and nourish deficiency. They are all rare good things. Speaking of it, Huan Mu is the person who has worked hardest and shoulders the most responsibilities in the entire Huan family. When her husband died, Huan Mu was still very young. Even if she gave birth to 2 sons and a daughter, she could still remarry and live a stable and comfortable life as long as she planned well, but she did not choose to do this. Instead she tried her best and it was extremely difficult. He raised his children to an adult and tried his best to support the crumbling wine shop. Jolien admires and respects Huan Mu, and his attitude is called affectionate, which is completely different from the previous appearance of coldly treating Huan Shen. First she pushed the steaming porridge water to the middle-aged woman, her bright apricot eyes curled up, and she took the porcelain spoon from the wooden cabinet again, very diligent. Seeing Jolien busy, Huan Mu couldn't help but feel a little flattered. She took the porridge bowl with a smile, tasted it, and then she couldn't help but praise her. She didn't expect her daughter-in-law to change her temper after only half a day when she was out. Not only did she smile sweetly and her tone was soft, she also took the initiative to cook. She was both filial and sensible, and she looked no worse than Kyung Niang from the Lin family next door. Hearing Huan Mu's gentle words, Jolien's lips raised slightly, and there were shallow dimples on his cheeks. The mother and daughter of the Huan family are kind-hearted. If anyone treats them well, they will definitely treat each other with sincerity. Jolien doesn't have to worry about contact with such a pure temperament. But when she raised her eyes, she could catch a glimpse of the cold-looking man on the opposite side, and she couldn't help gritting her teeth secretly. I don't know whether God pity her or torture her. It's a good thing that ordinary people can't ask for to live a life again, but Huan's family has a strange kind of Huan Shen, which has nothing to do with honesty. The military exploits still couldn't erase his must-have temperament, otherwise he would not kill the original body with such a harsh means. Seeing the second son sitting in the same place, still motionless, Huan's mother had a trace of doubt in her eyes, and asked, "Why didn't Shen'er eat it? This pig congee is better than Uncle Fu, and the rice is about to melt. The taste is particularly tender." Uncle Fu is a cook of the Huan family, with superb craftsmanship. I heard that his ancestors used to have an imperial cook, and he is quite famous in the local area. However, because there is only Huan Mu in the distillery, she needs to make koji, feed, ferment, fetch wine, and heat. I haven't cooked for several years. Huan Shen didn't want to worry his mother, and shook his head calmly. The steamed buns that were steamed earlier will be spoiled if you don't eat them. If you drink porridge, I will just eat that. Huan Yun took a bite of the powdered pig liver. She didn't understand why the second brother had an awkward relationship with his sister-in-law. They were clearly in the same family. Why did they give birth to an overnight hatred? Soon, the second brother will be transferred to the capital, just like the eldest brother. If the misunderstanding is not resolved, will it last for a year or two? The little girl had a simple temperament and couldn't hide things in her heart. Jolien glanced at her and could guess her thoughts, but she didn't say much. After eating, she and Huan Mu cleaned up the dishes and chopsticks, remembering the unsealed turbid wine, and she twisted her eyebrows. The former Huan family was also one of the best distillery in Bianzhou anyway. The quality of the sake produced was excellent and its reputation spread far. Many people would travel to Bianzhou just a few miles away just for a sip of wine. But today is different. Huan's father's death has taken away the secret recipe of Huan's sake brewing. Huan's mother has no talent, and it is impossible for others to tell her the skills of the family. In this way, the brewery can only make the worst. The turbid wine, also known as turbid mash, is white in color, and there are still fine grains of rice floating on the surface. The poets often refer to these impurities. If it hadn't been for Huan Mu to drop the price again and again, it was very low, I am afraid that no one would patronize it at all. Mother, I have nothing to do when I stay at home during the day, so I might as well go to the wine shop to help. I can make wine and I can help you share the burden. Huan Mu didn't doubt Jolien's words. After all, Zhou's family is a big brewer, and now it is very beautiful in Bianzhou city. She has a family and learning. It is not uncommon for her to know something. But she still shook her head and refused. The work in the wine shop is hard and tiring. What are you going to do as a little girl? Just take care of Yun Niang at home. Although Jolien is afraid of hardship and tiredness, she prefers to make wine and hopes to change the distressed situation of the Huan family. After all, Huan Yun is also her younger sister, who is both prosperous and ruined. Only when the entire Huan family is well, can she be better. Put the bowls and chopsticks in a wooden basin, soak them in alkaline water, Jolien continued to persuade, except for cooking, there is nothing to do at home, but the wine shop is very busy. Mother won't let me go. Do you dislike me for being clumsy? How can Huanmu dislike it? Seeing the woman's resolute attitude, she hesitated and sighed, go if you want. Anyway, you also know the location of the wine shop. You will go there by yourself tomorrow morning. Huanmu got up before dawn, and she couldn't wake people up early, so she urged her daughter-in-law to rest after she gathered the kitchen stuff. Back in the room, Jolien didn't feel sleepy after washing herself. She opened the window sash, and the bright moonlight sprinkled on the ground, like white training and light smoke, making her heart filled with emotions. Jolien's father and mother died in the war, and they were adopted by the Zhou family with their younger sister. Later, she married the Zhou family young master Kongzi, studied wine and took care of the wine shop. When she fell to death in a dry well, there was no more in that world. Any concerns? Before the death of the Huan Zhou family in the storybook, she once said, if there is another life, she will no longer be deceived by rhetoric, she will definitely treat her blood relatives and will no longer harm others and herself. Now that she has become her, she should also shoulder the responsibility of the original body. I thought that I would be awake all night, but I didn't expect to lie on a wooden bed that was so hard that Jolien fell asleep soon. The next day she was awakened by the cry of a chicken. She opened the door and walked to the kitchen. She found that there was a steamer on the stove. The dry food had been heated up, but Huanmu was not at home, and obviously went to the wine shop long ago. Jolien poured a bowl of hot water and ate small mouthfuls of the dry food. Her cooking skills were not very good, but Huanmu was worse than her. When steaming the dry food, more alkali was added, and the taste was bitter and dry. After filling his stomach, Jolien walked in the direction of the Huangjia restaurant according to the memory in his mind. Unexpectedly, when he passed the alley, a familiar figure came oncoming him. This person can be called handsome with 5 senses. However, the raw oily noodles, dressed in brocade clothes, barely had the 4 characters danded written on his forehead. As soon as he saw Yu Man, Jolien's heart surged with evil fire. Speaking of it, the reason why he had fallen into such a difficult situation, this person had also done a lot. If he hadn't threatened him to change the medicine package, Huan Shen would not find arsenic, let alone treat her as an arsenic. The enemy is always on guard. Yu Man originally planned to go to the Huan's house to find Jolien, but he didn't expect to meet him here. Seeing the woman approaching, his eyes lit up, and he realized that he had not seen him in just a day. Zhou's face was still the same as if he had changed his person. The frivolity and greed that haunted him disappeared a lot, and his eyes were bright and energetic. And no longer take the initiative to give or take a hug, is it intended to welcome or refuse? Jolien's stomach was full of anger, and he asked, "My surname is Yu, why are you hurting me like this? Actually put arsenic in the medicine bag, if something happens to Huan Shen, how can I keep my life?" Yu Man jumped with horror, and hurriedly turned his head to look around, for fear that someone would hear this and report him to the government. "Lian Niang, keep your voice down, if you spread it, how can I behave?" Jolien sneered, "You know now that you are afraid? Why don't you think about the consequences when you do it? I didn't want to hurt you, everything is arranged." Although Yu Man didn't intend to marry Jolien, he didn't send him to prison. He explained in a good manner, "Didn't you say that the second son of the Huan family is not pleasing to your eyes everywhere, and always it's a cold talk, so I'm thinking about giving you a sigh." Yu's family knows Yaman's master and Wuzhou. Even if Huan Shen died violently because of arsenic, they would close one eye, and they won't bother you. Jolien didn't expect that there would be such a despicable and shameless person in the world, and he was immediately trembling with anger. You man, even if Huan Shen is bad in 1,000 ways, it's the family I've been with since I was a kid. You want to kill him, and you still say so high-sounding. What is the difference with the executioner? You man couldn't help but stunned. He opened his mouth and whispered, "Didn't you curse so badly that you wanted him to die?" I was angry. How could there be no rubbing when a family lives under the same roof? There are still fights between teeth and tongue. It's unreasonable for you. You won't come to me again in the future. She grinned angrily. After all, Jolien didn't even sweep the startled young man, and quickly walked towards the direction of the wine shop. And Yu Man's hung was in the rich and honorable township and was held up by others since he was a child. How could he have suffered such grievances? Being scolded by a watery woman pointing his nose to his nose, he felt extremely embarrassed and stopped chasing Jolien and flung his sleeves away. Jolien walked forward with a cold face, but secretly let out a long sigh of relief. Yu Man is not a good thing at all. Taking this opportunity to draw a clear line with this person can also get rid of a big trouble, so as not to have trouble in the future. She was stopped by a middle-aged woman as soon as she walked to the door of the Huangjia restaurant. "Lian Niang, wait a moment, Aunt Lin has something to tell you." Jolien searched for the memory of the original body, and also remembered the identity of this woman. After the decline of the Huan family, they moved to a brick house on West Street. The neighbor was a family named Lin. The couple had only one daughter named Lin Qiangliang. I heard that she was both filial and virtuous, and had a gentle temperament. Body then into the dust. "Aunt Lin, are you doing anything to come to the wine shop?" In the storybook, Huan Shen is just a very brilliant supporting role. Ms. Li didn't describe the Huan family too much, but only roughly explained the fate of the Huan family. What happened during the period, Jolien is not clear. Aunt Lin grabbed Jolien's hand and patted it twice, showing a bit of intimacy, and said, "Your mother-in-law has been struggling with this wine shop all day, and she has spent most of her life now. Shen has become a guardian, and it will not be difficult to say that in the future. Why bother so hard? Is it not good to enjoy the good fortune?" Jolien caught a glimpse of his red skin, frowned slightly, and pulled his hand back without a trace. "Aunt Yilin means that I don't want my mother to work in the wine shop anymore." Aunt Lin's eyes flickered, and she patiently explained the reason: "Someone wants to buy your wine shop. This dilapidated store can't make much money every year, so it's better to sell it directly. It can also allow your mother-in-law to take a break, not to mention that they have given a lot of money, a full 200 taels. If you are frugal, you can spend several years." Aunt Lin spoke dryly, but Jolien did not waver. She also hoped to promote the wine shop to change the dilemma of the Huan family. How could she agree to this? Pursing her lips, she said, "I know you are for the good of my mother, but the Huan family has no other livelihoods besides the wine shop. You can't live by just relying on my uncle. I will come to wine recently. In the workshop, I will help my mother to beat her, and never let her be too tired. I also ask Aunt Lin to rest assured." Staring at Jolien steadily, Aunt Lin never expected that she would say such a thing. In the past, Zhou was the most greedy for money and profit. He also disliked the dilapidated and poorly managed wineries, and heard that they could sell 200 taels of silver. According to her temperament, she will definitely accept it in a hurry. Today is the sun coming out from the west? Lian Niang, no matter how good you are, think about it. We have been neighbors for so many years. Aunt Lin will not harm you. If you are not satisfied with the price, just discuss with the buyer." For fear that Jolien would refuse again, Aunt Lin didn't give her a chance to speak, and left as if to escape. Jolien was only a little skeptical at first, but now she has determined that the reason why Aunt Lin appeared in the Huangjia restaurant was absolutely instigated, but who instigated it and why she did it, she couldn't figure out why she wanted to break her head. Thinking all the way up the steps, as soon as he stepped over the threshold, a strong scent of alcohol was blowing in front of the wind, making Zhou Yan's lips tight, and Xing's eyes revealed a bit of disgust. Most of the turbid liquor in the Zhou dynasty was used to make such turbid mash, with few koji, rough materials, and short fermentation period. Various reasons led to the muddy color, sweet taste, and low alcohol content of the turbid mash. Ordinary people often drink rice wine, but they will not dislike it, but people of a little bit of identity are not satisfied with this type of wine. Instead, they seek more clear and transparent sake with a greener overall. They also took many elegant names, such as bamboo leaves green. Some type of. Jolien walked closer and saw an ordinary-looking man standing on the edge of the stove to fry wheat. This man should have good cooking skills. He kept turning the spatula to make the wheat ripe but not burnt, and the color became more and more intense. Force outbursts of wheat aroma. The man is Uncle Fu. At this moment, he is making music and must not be disturbed, otherwise the scorching of the wheat will also affect the quality of the koji. Jolien has been brewing wine for nearly 20 years. At a glance, you can see the problem of Huangjia Winerith method of making koji is too simple, only inferior koji ingredients can be made, and the formula is not particular. It's weird that you can make sake in this way. Seeing that her daughter-in-law was coming, Huan's mother hurriedly drew people to her and said in a low voice, "Don't disturb your Uncle Fu, first come and help your mother." Thinking of the woman he had just met, Jolien couldn't help asking, "Mother, Aunt Lin said that someone wants to buy a wine shop and is willing to take out 200 taels of silver. Is that true?" Huan Mu looked unnatural. She nodded slightly, "It is true." The whole thing was weird, Jolien had to ask, otherwise, if Huan Mu sold the wine shop, it would be even more difficult to make wine in the future. Pulling Huan Mu and sitting on the wooden chair, her expression was serious, her slightly plump body tightened, and she continued to ask, "Don't hide from me, who is the buyer?" "Zhou family." Huan Mu gritted her teeth and finally told the truth. Jolien's face changed in an instant. If Huan Shen could only say that it was a miserable supporting actor in the storybook, the Zhou family was completely the opposite. Their luck was excellent because they were the heroine's distant relatives, and they had a good brewing skills. Was eventually named the Emperor Merchant. The scenery is boundless, it is enviable. On the contrary, the Huan family ended up ruined. Even Huan Shen, who is the king of the town, was not spared. After he vomited blood and died, his body was fed to wild dogs, not even the whole body was left. Knowing the ending in advance, how could Jolien agree to transfer the wine shop out? "Mother, our shop can't sell it. Although my uncle is a guard, he will go to the capital after a while. The cost of food and clothing is not a small amount. 200 taels of silver seems to be a lot. Waiting in the capital. But there is no sound in the bustling place. It must be a long time to earn money so that the days can pass the better." Jolien stuck out the tip of her tongue and licked her dry lips. Her heart was extremely nervous. She was afraid that Huan Mu would be excited, so she should agree. This matter. Huan Mu couldn't help sighing, "Let me think about it again." After leaving the wine shop, Aunt Lin did not return to West Street directly. Instead, she went to the most prosperous area in Bianzhou City and entered a restaurant. This restaurant is also the property of Zhou's family, which sells a variety of fine wines, and there are many delicacies accompanied by wine, which attracts many customers. This was not the moment Aunt Lin came back, but she still felt awkward, standing in the middle of the lobby, looking around. After a while, a buddy stepped forward, took the person to the private room, and urged, "Mrs. Inside, you can go in." Aunt Lin nodded blankly, opened the door and walked in. At a glance, she saw the woman in green sitting by the window. She was about 15 or 16 years old. At this moment, she squeezed her chin with her hand and her eyes fell on the bustling street downstairs. From this angle, you can see Jiao's beautiful profile face, with the delicate outline, although it has not been greased, it has a hint of indescribable elegance. Hearing the movement, the woman tilted her head slightly, looking at the middle-aged woman with a pair of bright peach eyes, and asked casually, "Is things done?" Aunt Lin said embarrassingly. Jolien didn't agree. Zhou Yujin was surprised. She prided herself on knowing this half-sister very well. She knew that this woman had shallow eyelids and could do anything for the sake of silver. Now it is just a dilapidated wine shop. 200 taels are already a lot, why would Jolien refuse? What did she say? At that time, the concubine spoke clearly, but Jolien was bitten to death and refused to agree. You might as well add a little bit, and she will definitely be tempted by that time. Aunt Lin promised. Caressing the smooth window frame, Zhou Yujin slightly folded her eyebrows without opening her mouth. The reason she wanted to get the Huangjia restaurant was because there was a well in the backyard. The Huanzhou family have known each other a long time ago. They were very close to each other and there are almost no secrets at all. Therefore, Zhou Yujin's grandfather knew that there were 2 wells in the backyard of the Huan family. Any place that shines, the other bite is covered with a heavy blue stone plate all the year round. It is not allowed to be opened at will except for making koji to make wine. There are springs hidden in this well under the blue stone slab. The water quality is clear and the taste is extremely sweet. Whether it is making tea or making wine, it can play a finishing touch, no worse than those famous springs in the world. Zhou Yujin always remembered that when she was 4 years old, once when her grandfather was drunk, he couldn't help but muttered while holding her hand, saying that if Zhou's family also had an unnamed spring, the wine he brewed would be better than Huan's. At that time, her grandfather thought she was young and ignorant, and would forget about it, but Zhou Yujin was very impressed with this unnamed spring. For so many years, she dreamed of winning the Huangjia distillery and brewing something amazing. Amazing wine. It's a pity that Huan's family was well known in Bianzhou when his father was alive. She was afraid of making mistakes and didn't do anything, but just waited quietly. Fortunately, God didn't let her down after all. None of the 2 brothers in the Huan family were good at making wine. Father Huan was so angry that he had not had time to explain the uniqueness of the Wuming spring before they passed away. Huan Mu didn't know how to make wine, which made the wine shop continue to decline. Aunt Lin looked at Zhou Yujin and found that the beloved lady was stunned. She didn't dare to speak, so she stood against the wall, and muttered in her heart, Huan's restaurant is broken into that virtue. It actually cost 200 taels of silver to buy it, so there is really no money to spend. Zhou Yujin returned to her senses and waved her hand to the middle-aged woman, go and persuade Jolien to raise the price to 300 taels. 300 taels? Aunt Lin took a deep breath, her face was full of shock, and she trembled and asked, is it too much? Zhou Yujin slowly shook her head, she glanced at the maid, who took the mumbling Aunt Lin out, and Yajian suddenly became quiet. Jolien didn't know what happened in the restaurant. At this moment, she and Huanmu looked at each other, sorted out their thoughts, and said, the reason why you want to sell the restaurant is because the business in our shop is not good. After getting better, this idea should be dispelled, right? Huanmu sighed with a low expression, how can it be so easy to run a wine shop? The most fundamental problem can't be solved. It's useless to say anything. Forget it, let's not mention this. Wash the cockleburr in hot water with your mother. Squeeze the juice for later use. Mother, I've been to the Zhou's wine shop before, and it doesn't seem to be the way to do it. Jolien said with embarrassment. It's not like this, what should I do? Huanmu panicked for a while. Before the death of her husband, she had never intervened in winemaking, so that she didn't understand the Huan family's formula at all. The method of making music like this was still her. Slowly find out, is there any mistake? Jolien patted Huanmu's hand to appease, and said, I remember the master of the brewery once said that if you want to brew a clear textured rice wine, you need good white noodles as the main ingredient, and you can't bring wheat bran, the medicinal material is not cocklebur. It's the same as Polygonum vulgar, but Chuanxiang, white aconite, Atractalodes, and Guadi flower. Huanmiu couldn't help being stunned. A stone of wheat was 300 kilograms, but she could only grind 60 kilograms of fine white noodles, not to mention that the medicinal materials were not cheap. At this moment, Uncle Fu had already fried the wheat, poured it into the willow basket, and wiped his sweat with his cuffs. He raised his eyes to see Zhou Lian standing in the room. He couldn't help but twist his brows, and his expression was also gloomy. Why did Lian Niang come here? The wine shop is sultry and hot. If you are not used to the smell, please go back first. The so-called authorities are obsessed, the bystanders are clear, Zhou Lian sees clearly, this Fu Shu is very disgusted with her, or he is very disgusted with the original body. If it is not for Huanmiu's face, I am afraid he will directly sweep her out. Lian Niang said that there is a problem with our method of making music, which is different from Zhuajia's wine shop. Uncle Fu, you said that the rice wine is not good, does it have something to do with the koji? Huanmiu paled in anxious expression, her eyes fell. If white noodles are really used on the fried wheat, wouldn't these foods be wasted? Uncle Fu asked in a deep voice. Lian Niang is most bored with wine making, but she still knows the recipe of the distiller's yeast. He didn't have a good impression of Zhou Lian. The new wife didn't ask her to be diligent when she came in, but she couldn't wait for her elders to serve her. Thinking of Huanmiu's high fever and still cooking for Zhou Lian, Uncle Fu suffocated her stomach. Lian Niang, if you stay at home well, you don't need to intervene in the wine shop. Go back. He waved his hand and urged. Although Uncle Fu is nominally a servant hired by the Huan family, for so many years, if he hadn't been helping out, the wine shop would not be able to sustain it. Therefore, in the face of his cold treatment, Zhou Lian had almost no room for rebuttal. I know that you are angry that I was lazy before. People always have a chance to reform, so let me try it in the wine shop. If I don't make wine as good as you, it's not too late to kick me out, otherwise I will come back tomorrow, swaying in front of the two every day. I'm afraid it will delay the winemaking. Zhou Lian straightened up and said. Uncle Fu didn't expect Zhou's not only to commit rape, but also to be so brazen. He just wanted to get someone out, so he listened to Huanmiu's persuasion softly, you give Lian Niang a chance. The sake of Zhou's family restaurant is quite popular throughout Bianzhou. She might be more famous. Huan's mother was kind and didn't want to embarrass her daughter-in-law, so she interceded. Uncle Fu sighed and slapped on the table fiercely, you will arrange the steps of making music today. If something goes wrong, leave the wine shop immediately. Zhou Lian nodded solemnly, she walked to the willow basket, probed the already fried wheat with her hands, and once again sighed about Yu Fu's good cooking skills. The chef's greatest skill is to grasp the heat. Even if she has brewed wine for so many years, the wheat will not be better than Uncle Fu. Of course, there were many ways to make music during the Republic of China, but it was not limited to speculation, and Zhou Lian was not familiar with it. Huanmiu's brewing koji requires 3 parts of wheat, 1 part steamed, 1 part stir-fried, and 1 raw. These grains are all crushed and mixed together. Although it is not as good as white noodles, it only needs to be replaced with suitable medicinal materials. The effect is not much worse. Thinking of the dowry he was holding in the cage, Zhou Lian had an idea in his heart and said, Uncle Fu, you still crush the wheat according to the original method. I will go to the drugstore and come back later. Upon hearing this, Huanmiu wiped her hands with her apron, and said warmly, wait first, I'll get you some silver. The medicinal materials in the city are not cheap. Just as Huanmiu went to the next door to withdraw money, Zhou Lian said a few words to Uncle Fu, and then hurriedly left. When the middle-aged woman returned with her purse, only Uncle Fu was left in the room. Where is Lian Niang? She said she has a lot of money and can't use your money. When he said this, Uncle Fu looked complicated, and he hugged Willow Basket in his arms and walked quickly into the courtyard. Huan Mu followed the same step, helping to lift with both hands, pour the wheat into the stone mill, and slowly push the stone mill. Huan Mu's complexion is not so good, and she can't help chanting, Niang Lian is also a bitter. There is a stepmother and a stepfather. When she enters the door, she doesn't get much dowry. If she buys all the medicinal materials, she should be how do you live? If madam is really worried, wait until the distiller's song is prepared, and then I will pay Niang Niang. Uncle Fu is in his 40s, his body is still strong and strong, even without Huan Mu's help, he can grind the grain to pieces. This stall, Zhou ran to Huan's house quickly. Koji making is a very critical step for wine making. It cannot be delayed at all. Therefore, she must buy back the medicinal materials as soon as possible. Broken, divided into categories, there can be no mistakes. After receiving the memory of the original body, Zhou also knew where the dowry was placed. Although the original body's temper was a bit pungent, he recognized the temperament of the Huan family, and knew that this family was very upright and would never be greedy for the bride's stuff. From the day of marriage, her private money has been kept in the house, and no one has ever touched it. As Huan Mu said, Zhou is indeed suffering. Obviously she is also the young lady of the Zhou family, but she has no status at all. Compared with Zhou Yujin, she is a heaven and an underground. After all, Zhou's father's newly married step-family is the Fan family. They are not of a low background, and they have given birth to a pair of children. They have already established a firm foothold in Zhou's family. There were 100 taels of silver in the cage. Zhou took out a silver ingot and put it in his sleeve, then walked out without looking up, but didn't want to hit a human wall. The numbness and pain swept over in an instant. She stretched out her hand and rubbed the tip of her slightly reddish nose. Looking at Huan Shen who was close at hand, she had a bit of amazement in her eyes. She took a few breaths to suppress the tears, and said anxiously, "Uncle, what are you looking for me? The wine shop is busy making music, I have to buy medicinal materials." Sideways blocking Zhou path, Huan Shen's expression was gloomy, her black eyes seemed to be quenched with ice, and he asked, "What is your purpose in going to the wine shop? You don't just want to harm me, are you planning to attack your mother?" Zhou knew that the Lord Zhenguo in the script was very suspicious. Because of the arsenic, he was very wary of himself, and this guard would not easily dissipate. In order to prevent this person from doing anything to herself, she can only stay with Huan Mu to ensure safety. After taking care of her thoughts, she patiently explained, "I said earlier that the bowl of medicine was replaced by the pharmacy guy, and you man wanted to harm you, not me. If I really had a murderous heart, why not? When you are unable to resist, pour the poison down." Huan Shen obviously thought of this too, his phoenix eyes flickered slightly, and he had guessed the matter 7 or 8 minutes. "You have known that there is arsenic in the bowl. The reason why you fell to the ground in front of me was because you changed your mind temporarily." Meeting the man's scrutiny gaze, Zhou couldn't help panicking, and backed back again and again, with his legs next to the wooden chair in the room, and one sitting on top of him without observing, but Huan Shen didn't mean to let anyone go, supporting the back of the chair with both hands. "Be very close to her. If you want to add a crime, there is nothing wrong with it. Your red mouth and white teeth condemned my guilt, there is no evidence at all, I am not convinced." Zhou raised his head and stared at the young man. The beautiful apricot eyes were filled with anger and became brighter, completely different from the turbid greed of the past. Huan Shen sneered secretly. He didn't expect a woman's acting skills to be so good. He was full of guilty conscience when he saw arsenic before, but now he can lie without a red heart. No wonder his eldest brother was cheated by her. For a whole year, I couldn't see the true face of Zhou Shi when I was dying. Feeling the chill surging through Huan Shen's body, Zhou shuddered, and wanted to leave, but was strictly blocked by the youth. Unless she pushed people away, she couldn't get away at all. You get out! Huan Shen did not say a word, but showed his attitude with practical actions. He was still bent over, motionless, with the dagger in his palm. The scabbard was worn and yellowed, and the blade hidden in it reflected the white cold light. The sharp tip of the knife aimed at the position of the heart through the clothes. As long as Huan Shen was cruel, she would definitely die here. Realizing this, Zhou Lian was so frightened to the extreme, she gasped for a few times, her face pale instantly. Secretly admonishing himself to calm down, Zhou Lian also knew that Huan Shen didn't intend to kill her, otherwise with this person's ability, she would have died a long time ago. How could she still talk so much nonsense? Pulling her palms hard, the sharp tingling calmed her mood a lot, and she whispered, "Mother is still waiting for me in the wine shop. She can't find anyone and will definitely go home." Hearing this, Huan Shen frowned slightly, retracted the dagger, and threatened in a cold voice, "No matter whether you remarry or not, if you dare to do things that hurt the world, you can't bear the consequences." Nodding perfunctorily, Zhou Lian really didn't dare to be alone with the young man anymore. After this person stood still, she walked out the door quickly without saying anything. When Huan Yun heard the movement in the yard, she ran out and rushed out, but she only saw Huan Shen standing in front of her. Some doubts rose in her heart and asked, "Second brother, I just seemed to hear the voice of my sister-in-law. Why don't you see people?" "She went to work for the mother in the wine shop." The young man replied calmly. "A few days ago, he went to perform a mission in the town. After returning to Bianzhou, Shang Guan gave grace to let these guards rest for 3 days, so Huan Shen could stay at home for a few days without going to the city." A woman's face appeared in his mind, his complexion became more gloomy, his fingers rubbed the edge of the dagger, and without saying more, he turned and left. Even after leaving Huan's house, the feeling of the tip of the knife resting on her chest seemed to stay on her body. Zhou Lian's heart thumped and thumped extremely fast, but it was important to make music, and she did not continue to waste time. "I went to a pharmacy and bought medicinal materials such as chuanxiang, white aconite, atractalodes, and guadi. In the wine shop just now, Zhou Lian actually lied. Yuan is not interested in winemaking, and has never set foot in the Zhuajia winery. She has no idea how to make music there and what tricks are there. However, she has studied in the Republic of China for more than 20 years, and her craftsmanship is not low. Nothing will happen. Zhuque with 4 kinds of medicinal materials has a beautiful name Xiangkan. The wine brewed with fragrant spring koji is as luscious as a clear spring flowing in the mountains and forests with a tinkling sound. After drinking it, the lips and teeth leave fragrance, which is unstoppable." Thinking about the taste of the wine, the woman's cheeks finally recovered a bit of blood. When Zhou Lian returned to the distillery, Uncle Fu and Huanmu were still grinding the wheat. She didn't go forward and disturbed. Instead, she found a small miller to grind the herbs into powder, and then sift them with a horsetail basket. The texture of the powder is more delicate. The physical work was really hard. At this moment, Uncle Fu's complexion was flushed, and his cheeks were full of sweat. When the wheat in the willow basket was all done, the brown clothes he was wearing had been soaked. Huanmu returned to the house, took 2 soft soaked cloths, and threw one to Uncle Fu to wipe off his sweat. Seeing Zhou Lian's familiar movements, Uncle Fu had a little less contempt for her, but he still didn't believe that Zhou Shi could make good songs. There are tens of millions of people who make wine, but how many fine wines are there? If Zhou Lian only went to the wine shop to take a look at all the steps of winemaking, he would not have been forced by his mother's family to get helpless before, and reluctantly married. "The flour and herbs are all ready, what are you going to do?" Uncle Fu's tone was serious, without a hint of gentleness. Zhou Lian didn't care, she didn't care about what others thought of her, she just wanted to make the Huan's restaurant bigger and stronger, take good care of Huan Yun's mother and daughter, and prevent them from suffering and full of pain as recorded in the script. Unwilling to leave this world, Uncle Fu and Niang Rong crushed 100 caddies of wheat. If you want to make fragrant spring chu, you must match with Qiliang Chuangsheng, half white aconite, 3 half atractalodes, half Qiang guadi, and then the herbal powder divide into 3 portions, mix with white flour, and add 8 liters of well water to each portion. When she was speaking, Jolien had already divided the herbs. She had done this countless times, and it was most appropriate to describe it with the 4 words light car and familiar road. Upon seeing this, Uncle Fu was even more surprised. He didn't expect Zhou to be so capable. Could she really inherit the brewing talent of Zhou's family? Together, Jolien and Huanmiu poured the flour into the wooden basin, and then added herbs next to each other. "Mother, do we have well water in the wine shop?" Huanmiu was embarrassed. She had never heard of such a statement before, and couldn't help but ask, "What is Jinghua Shui?" Jinghua Shui is the well water drawn in the early morning. It is perfect for making music. If it doesn't, the fragrant spring music made will be a bit inferior. Although Jolien has a mild temper, it is the best in winemaking. She was picky, and she couldn't help but pinched her eyebrows and her lips were drawn into a line. "I drilled the well water just before dawn. It should be the well water that you said." Huanmiu has always been diligent, and she comes to the wine shop every day with stars and moons. Not only will the house be cleaned, but the water in the tank will be changed again, so as not to accumulate dust. "I didn't expect it to come in handy now." Jolien breathed a sigh of relief. She nodded, took her pancreas to wash her hands, poured out the water with a scoop, and poured it into the basin next to it. Uncle Fu stared at Zhou's movements and found that she scooped roughly the same amount of water each time. This vision was several times stronger than that of ordinary people. Even when the father of Huan was alive, the Kuei-sai head could not beat her. Realizing this, the middle-aged man's cheeks flushed, and his heart was full of shock. Jolien didn't notice the strangeness of Uncle Fu. She squatted on the ground and stirred the medicinal surface evenly with a shovel. "This thing must be dry and wet properly, hold it loosely. If there is more water, it will make a heart-shaped song, and if there is less water, it will not be able to form." There was too much grated wheat in the wine shop this time. After the 3 of them thoroughly mixed the medicinal noodles and sifted them through a coarse sieve, it was almost noon. Uncle Fu was more vigorous, pressed the medicine surface firmly, covered it with white cloth and quilt, and allowed it to stand still for 3 or 4 hours before putting it into the curved mold. There was no need to worry at this moment. "You take a break first, I'll go cook," Uncle Fu muttered. Jolien wanted to help in the past, but was held back by Huan's mother. She said, "Ms. Lien, don't go. You have made all the medicinal noodles. It's hardest, but take a break." At the caring eyes of the woman, her heart rose with enthusiasm, and she couldn't help but laugh, her beautiful face glowing with red, and she looked more gorgeous than the rose on the branch. "Be delicate." Huan's mother was stunned for a moment, only to think that the longer the daughter-in-law, the more beautiful. Uncle Fu made scallion noodles. Even if the ingredients are ordinary and the process is simple, it still smells delicious. Jolien was tired all morning. He ate a little faster now. He waited until he was 7 minutes full before putting down his chopsticks. After all, he had to work a few hours later, and it would not be convenient to eat. The room where Fakubing was built by Huan's father. It was paved with wooden boards, maiyuzai, and bamboo curtains to isolate the ground. After cleaning, there was no problem. The 3 of them were busy until dark. Seeing that his daughter-in-law was so sensible, Huanmiu was tired, but with a smile in her eyes, she said, "Before I go out in the morning, I will stew the sticks, and I can drink it while I go back." Soup. Upon hearing the word "go back," Jolien couldn't help stiffening, and didn't want to face Huan Shen at all. Squinting her eyes at the wine shop, she tentatively asked, "There should be a lot of wine in our shop, why don't we stay vigil here? Muddy wine is cheap and worthless. No thieves will steal it. What night to watch? It's not enough to toss people." Zhou Yan pursed her lips and walked silently forward. As soon as she stepped into the gate of Huan's house, she paused slightly and looked unnatural when she saw the young man practicing marksmanship in the courtyard. Going into the kitchen with her head down, she washed her hands, poured the thick and white soup into a bowl, and mixed a courgette. Although the dishes were not rich, they were meaty and vegetarian. When Huan Yun saw her sister-in-law, she showed a shy smile on her face, and took the initiative to help with her work. She was really diligent and tight. After the food arrived on the table, Huan Shen walked over as usual, as if threatening her with a dagger had never happened. Jolien squeezed his chopsticks tightly, his nails turned blue and white, and he didn't move it for a long time. Seeing this, Huan Mu couldn't help asking, "Why didn't Lian Niang eat? But the food is not to my appetite." Before Jolien could reply, Huan Shen laughed. He was born with extremely handsome facial features, and his voice was as mellow as wine. "Cool down. My uncle was joking, how can I be angry about those trivial things?" She twitched the corners of her mouth, her tone perfunctory. Don't see Huan Shen apologized kindly, but his eyes were threatening. If he dared to complain to Huan Mu, this lunatic might be certain what he would do. "Mother, I thought about it, the wine shop has to keep someone to watch the shop at night, or should I move over to live in?" Looking up at Huan Mu, there was a hint of expectation in the woman's words, although it was not obvious, she was caught by Huan Shen perceived it. Putting down the chopsticks, Zhuomu said with a puzzled face, "It is enough to check the cubing twice a day, how can I move it over? Huan Shen will be transferred to the capital in 1 month. During this time, Jolien can't wait to avoid him completely, so as not to be threatened with a dagger by this person in the room again. It is just an excuse to look after cubing." She knew a little bit, and Huan Shen knew it well. "Mother, today's Xiang Chuan Chu is made according to the steps I said. If something goes wrong, Uncle Fu will definitely not leave me in the wine shop again. I am no worse than Zhou Yujin. Why can she make it? Drink fine wine, but I can't." The original body is a pinch and aggressive temperament, and has always been dissatisfied with her half-sister. If she said that, Huan Mu was more acceptable. Everyone has their own fate, why bother to compete with Zhou Yujin? If you really want to live in the wine shop, you have to wait until tomorrow to clean up the house, but you live alone in the shop. I really don't worry." Huan Shen, who was silent for a long time, suddenly raised his head with a gentle smile on his face, and actively proposed, "It's better to move my son and sister-in-law to the store together. Although I don't know how to make wine, I'm still good at making wine, and I'm not afraid of bad guys." While talking, those sharp phoenix eyes stared at Jolien. She was very clear in her heart that the gangster Huan Shen said was not the rogue on the street, but herself. Jolien hadn't tasted it before, but now he knows exactly what it feels like to lift a rock and smash him in the foot. Today, Dezhou's Lord Zhenguo is no longer a role only in the script, but a person who really lives around him. He is very suspicious, and if there is a grudge, he will be retributed, and the means are ruthless. If you don't step up and eliminate your guard, I am afraid it will be difficult to get rid of the fate of the original body. This is a way. Huan Mu nodded seriously. The words spoken are like splashed water. Jolien first proposed to see the store. If she changes her words now, wouldn't it be a guilty conscience? As the so-called suspect steals an axe, even if there is no evidence, as long as the seeds of doubt are buried in the heart, this emotion will continue to grow. Jolien remained silent, lowered his head to eat the food in the meal. His complexion was calm. If it hadn't been for the blue veins in his left hand on the table, Huan Shen thought she didn't care. The next day, Jolien got up before dawn and went to the wine shop with Huan Mu. She was persuading Huan Mu to change her mind and sell the wine shop to the Zhou family along the way. Because of the busy and hard work of making music, no liquor was sold in the store yesterday, and the doors and windows were tightly closed. As soon as Huan Mu entered the room, she first removed the window and the wine jar into the hall. Jolien followed her to beat her. She was used to these tasks a long time ago, and she didn't feel tired. There are a lot of people living near the wine shop. Some people are greedy for cheap, and some people want to be convenient. They come here to buy wine. Although the texture of the muddy mash is muddy and there are a lot of floating rice grains in the upper layer, they can still be imported. Jolien stood behind the counter to collect the money. She was beautiful and beautiful, she spoke softly, and was extremely patient, which was completely different from the lazy virtue before. Some neighbors came to the door and saw Zhou's turning around. One or two of them were shocked. This is the first time the Huan family's daughter-in-law comes back to the wine shop? It's really unfilial to enter the door for a whole year and wait for the man to die before thinking about working. I thought she was going to marry Yu's family, as a young lady in the drugstore, and meeting with foreign men in the ruined temple all day long. Maybe she would have given her body to someone else and married such a daughter-in-law. No one can squint. Jolien had heard a lot of these unbearable words in her life. At that time, all of her close relatives died in the chaos of war. After her husband was gone, not only were some people said that she was ridiculous, but also regarded her as a lone star with a hard life. When she was most desperate, the master craftsman of the wine shop explained to her, saying that a person's life is like making wine. It was originally a whole grain. It must be stripped of wheat bran, ground into powder, and then fermented to become luscious and mellow. The wine, the wind and frost sword in front of him seemed sharp, compared with the time in the wine cellar, it was only a short moment. The two women with broken mouths were muttering, while casting their eyes on Jolien. Seeing the woman raised her head calmly, they couldn't help being a little embarrassed and shut up. It happened that Huan Miu came out from the backyard and saw that the two of them turned red, and she was very puzzled for a while, but she was not a talkative person, and did not take the initiative to ask questions. It stands to reason that there are the most guests drinking in the morning, but the business of the Huangjia restaurant is really bad. Jolien counted, and there were no 10 people coming to the house. She sighed helplessly and could only pin her hope in the barn. If there are fine wines and wines, the situation may get better. Just when Jolien was thinking about it, she saw Aunt Lin walk in quickly, with a smile on her face, first greeted her mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, and then said straightforwardly, "Sister-in-law Huan, Lady Lien, the buyer knows that you are living well. It's not easy. I have increased the price again. I plan to buy this wine shop with 300 taels of silver, and ask about it in the city of Bianzhou. How can there be such a kind people? I have lived in the Zhou's house for 15 years, but I don't think there is any kindness. The merchants seek profit and never make a loss-making business. The Zhou's willing to pay 300 taels of silver shows that the value of the wine shop is far more than that. I didn't expect Aunt Lin to treat the merchants as kind and compassionate people." Facing Jolien's run, Aunt Lin couldn't even say a word. Her skin turned into pig liver color. She wanted to turn around and leave, but she couldn't bear the reward that Zhou Yujin had promised. Huan's mother also recalled at this moment. In the past, Huan Zhuo's family had a good relationship and the relationship was very close, but after Huan's father passed away, Zhou Xiaotong never set foot here again. Even the marriage between the two families was his. A butler was sent to take care of it. How can someone who doesn't care about their own daughters be considered a good person? Huan Miu has a gentle temperament and never gets angry easily, but now she has a cold face, and she is polite. "Aunt Lin, there is something to do in the store, and it is not very convenient for you to go back here." With this dazzling order to chase customers, Aunt Lin's round face turned green and red, as if paint was splashed on her head. She was already good-looking, and couldn't help but screamed, "It's like there are guests in a wine shop. I can't sell a bottle of wine. If you want me, I will close the wine shop a long time ago, lest you lose the face of the Huan family." Zhou Yan pressed his lips tightly, opened the curtain and walked to the backyard. Seeing her appearance, Aunt Lin's arrogance became more and more arrogant, and she had forgotten Zhou Yujin's instructions, and vomited all the dirty and smelly things. You also treat Zhou as a treasure. I don't know your good daughter-in-law. I'm stealing a man outside, and when my belly gets bigger in the future, it can be said to be the posthumous child of Huan Jin. Ah! Suddenly being splashed with water, Aunt Lin screamed. Zhou Lian held an empty basin in his hand and said coldly, "Your mouth is not clean, it must be washed with water." In the early morning, Uncle Fu picks sauerkraut in the backyard, tidy up and stews it on the stove with stick bones. In the morning, he can make a creamy thick soup. The meat is slightly powdery, and the bone marrow has already melted in the soup. It is accompanied by the special aroma of sauerkraut. Thinking about it, I feel that my mouth is full of fluids. The pot of water that Zhou Lian brought out happened to have just washed the sauerkraut, and it exuded a strong smell on her body. Aunt Lin's clothes were soaked and there were vegetable leaves in her hair. That embarrassing virtue was similar to the beggars on the street. It makes no difference. Aunt Lin was trembling with anger. She wanted to rush up and beat her, but she saw Uncle Fu coming out of the backyard. A glance at the door made the middle-aged woman tremble, and she didn't dare to mess around anymore. "What's the matter?" Uncle Fu asked in a deep voice. Zhou Lian put the tub on the bench, and said in a calm tone, "Aunt Lin was bought by the Zhou family and became a lobbyist. She wanted us to sell the wine shop. I disagreed with my mother, so she slandered me and said me foolish and debauched. Aunt Lin also knows that I can't ask for it today." She gritted her teeth and cursed, "Zhou, you and Yuman are involved in the stall, how can the neighbors in the neighborhood not know about it? Sister-in-law Huan stays in the wine shop every day. I haven't heard the news now, do you think everyone is blind?" After that, she ran away quickly without waiting for the Huan family to respond. There were no outsiders in the hall, and she immediately calmed down. Huan Mu set her gaze on her daughter-in-law, and tremblingly asked, "Lian Niang, do you really like the young master Yu family?" Zhou Lian shook his head. "The Yu family is also a wealthy household in Bianzhou anyway. I have been married once, how can I cling to his family? What's more, the oily noodles born by the young master of the Yu family, walks on the road and walks vainly, at first glance, he is addicted to female all the year round. It's caused by too much energy consumption, and such a person is really unbearable." Seeing Zhou Lian's face full of disgust, that expression did not seem to be fake at all, Huan Mu sighed with relief and scolded herself for random thinking. Private meeting? In the morning, Zhou Lian went to check the cubing again, and found that the temperature was not enough, so he spread a layer of wheat glutinous rice on the bamboo curtain. Walking out of the room, she caught a glimpse of a well in the corner, and asked a little strangely, "Mother, why should this well be covered with blue stone?" Huan Mu thought carefully, "I only came to the wine shop after your father-in-law passed away. The blue stone slab was here at that time. I heard that it seemed that the well was suffering from the water, and it was covered by the water for fear of the long-time worker. Is the well water bitter?" Zhou Lian remembered that there was a mention in the story that Zhou's family became a royal merchant because there was a well in the old wine shop in Bianzhou. The water quality was excellent, and the sake produced was extremely luscious. But she checked the memory of the original body and knew that Zhuajia's wine shop was collecting water in the river, not in the well. Whenever the wine was being made, the chief worker brought the wooden barrel to fetch water from the river. The scene was originally in its original form. From a young age to a big one, you will never go wrong. Could it be that the well in front of the heroine was the one that made the heroine admire? Otherwise, why would the Zhou family spend so much effort just to buy the dilapidated wine shop? Zhou Lian walked slowly to the well, put the blue stone slab on both hands, trying to lift it up. Seeing this, Huan Mu, who was standing next to him, hurriedly stopped. "Ms. Lian, don't want to move, this blue stone is thick enough for a chopping board. When your father-in-law is still there, you will order 4 senior workers to lift the board every few months. Say you want to let the ground breathe in the courtyard, don't flash your waist." Jolien was self-aware. Hearing this, he couldn't help letting go and stepped back. She thinks this well is weird, but it's not easy to talk to Huanmu until the matter is found out. After all, if she guesses wrong, let her mother-in-law rejoice. I'm afraid it will make people more uncomfortable. Mother, I just brought the quilt over. I will clean up the 2 rooms and stay here at night. When speaking, Jolien's tone was a little low. When she thought of being alone with Huan Shen under the same roof, she couldn't help frowning, but fortunately, the man didn't intend to kill her, and at best it was only a threat. Seeing her daughter-in-law's slightly blue face, Huan's mother thought she was off by Aunt Lin, and she couldn't help feeling a little distressed. Even if Lian Niang was ignorant before, but now she is diligent and filial, how can she let others slander? If Aunt Lin dared to talk nonsense next time, she would have to use a broom to drive people out. The Huan family in the past was considered a wealthy household in Bianzhou City. The wine shop occupies a large area and has many rooms for long-term workers. It is a pity that Huan's mother does not know how to make wine, and the business is not as good as the day. These old people have already ran away. Some of them went to Zhou's house, including Miao Ping, the former chief steward of the wine shop. The original body often came to Huan's house to play when he was young. He also knew a little about Miao Ping. He knew that this person had studied for a few years and would settle accounts. When he recites it, he must have been eaten in the belly of a beast long ago. It's a pity that it's easy to forget your grudges. Miao Ping climbed high sticks after Huan's father passed away. Others could not say anything other than scolding him for having no conscience. After all, Huan's mother could not support a wine shop, and the Huan's brothers did not know how to make wine, so they continued to stay here. The talents are fools. After cleaning the 2 adjacent rooms, Jolien began to make the bed, and while busying her, she wondered how to remove the slate from the well without disturbing Huanmu. It is definitely impossible to ask Uncle Fu for help. Uncle Fu is loyal to Huanmu and will definitely not lie to her. For a while, Jolien didn't think about it. No matter how heavy the bluestone slab was, she couldn't hold the hammer. When everyone was gone after dark, it would not be too late for her to think about it. The woman was planning pretty well, but unexpectedly, it started raining as soon as it was dark. Crackling drops of water hit the eaves, and it was accompanied by lightning and thunder. I don't know if Huan Shen will come. It's best if he doesn't come. Have to find ways to deal with him. Suddenly, there was a bang outside the door, and Jolien's heart jumped. She hurriedly held up the oil paper umbrella and opened the back door of the wine shop. When she saw the drenched youth, she frowned and shouted, "Quickly enter the house and change clothes, it won't be good if you catch a cold." Jolien is not short in stature, but Huan Shen is too tall, more than 8 feet tall. She can only straighten her arms hard and hold an umbrella to protect her from the rain. However, due to the heavy rain, she was also watered. Through, the cloth clung to the body tightly, bringing bursts of coolness. Finally walking down the corridor, she wiped her face with her hand and couldn't help saying, "Uncle, even if you don't trust me, you don't need to come here in the rain. If there is someone who has 2 shortcomings, who can afford this responsibility?" Jolien's cheeks were pale with cold, but his lips were especially blushing. With those moist apricot eyes, it looked really pitiful. However, Huan Shen was both wary and disgusted with her. Seeing the virtue of a woman, she felt that she did it deliberately, and regarded him as a person who could not be on the stage like you Mana. The young man ignored her, pursing his lips and turning his head away. Jolien ignored Huan Shen, walked into the room, sat in front of the bronze mirror, took up a dry soft cloth and wiped the water stains on his head and face. Speaking of it, although the original body has the same name and the same surname as her, their appearance is not very similar. Jolien's facial features are more gorgeous, with dark and thick eyebrows, with a bit of heroism, while the original body's face has no edges and corners, and is very beautiful. The figure is also somewhat plump. Two people who are clearly different, but because of the same name and surname are closely linked together, it is really mysterious. The rain was getting heavier outside. Jolien changed his clothes, walked to the kitchen, took out a crucian carp from the tank, cleaned it, and fried it in a pot. Adding scallion and other seasonings in turn, stewed it with hot water. Just when she turned around to cut the tofu into pieces, she saw Huan Shen standing at the door of the kitchen. He changed into an indigo blue robe, his hair was still wet, and his eyes fell on her for a moment. "My uncle is looking for me for something." Even if he knew the young man's thoughts, Jolien's attitude was still moderate. "Since I hope that Huan Shen can completely get rid of prejudice, first of all, she must treat each other with sincerity. It is not advisable to lie or greet falsely. Huan Shen can climb to the position of Zhen Guogong in just 10 years, and she will definitely not be fooled easily. What is your relationship with Yu Man?" Half an hour ago, Huan's mother returned home, called him and Yuniang to the main room, and asked the brothers and sisters not to be deceived by the rumors outside, mistakenly thinking that his sister-in-law was behaving badly. But Jolien's private meeting with Yu Manchu was what he saw with his own eyes, and he couldn't do anything about it. At that time, Yu Man took Zhou's hand and led people to the ruined temple. His eldest brother's bones were not cold. The adulterer and the adulterer did such a nasty evil. If he hadn't been on official business, he had to go to the official office. Going to guard in the surrounding towns has already broken the two men's adultery. Now the mother obviously heard the wind, but she believed in Zhou Shi. What kind of ecstasy did this woman give her? "I did move my mind before, but now I have repented, and I have nothing to do with that person." Is this answer uncle satisfactory? Huan's mother was pure and kind, and she didn't know how to give birth to a suspicious son like Huan Shen. Jolien went down to the pot wild tofu, and secretly slandered himself. "In that case, you really have an affair with Yu Man? You are smart and get out in time. Yu's family is quite famous in Bianzhou. It is absolutely impossible for a second married woman to be a young grandmother. If you are willing to fall, I am willing to be a concubine, and I will not stop it." Jolien turned his back to the youth and couldn't help rolling his eyes. Suddenly, there was a loud noise outside, accompanied by rumbling thunder. Jolien was afraid that something was wrong with the warehouse, so he didn't care about cooking, so he rushed out and took a fire folder and ran to the warehouse to check. There was no water leakage in the eaves. Where did the movement come from? Full of doubts, she walked back and forth around the house holding the oil paper umbrella, but she bumped into a hard object under her feet. Jolien squatted down and carefully distinguished, and found that the bluestone slab covering the well was actually split. Fortunately, she was still thinking about how to smash the slab, but she didn't expect that even God was helping. What is the water of this well? Whether suffering is sweet, whether it is good or bad, tomorrow we'll see the difference. At dinner, the two of them drank fish head tofu soup with the steamed dry food in the morning, and no one spoke first. Even if Huan Shen was very wary of Jolien, she had to admit that this woman's cooking skills were indeed better than her mother's. Although the taste of the food was not excellent, it was said to be salty and delicious. The Lord Zhenguo in the storybook was close to him, and Jolien was really not in a good mood when he thought of his method of dealing with the original body. Fortunately, Huan Shen will be on duty tomorrow, patrolling the city, and won't look at him with that gloomy gaze all day long. The beautiful woman was sitting at the table with an ancient book about wine in her hand, but she was upset and couldn't read what was written in the book anyway. The maid brought the red date tea to her and whispered, "Girl, you are here in Gishui. It is when you are weak. Don't worry about those little things." Small things? How could it be small things? Zhou Yujin's eyes were cold. She didn't expect that she would have missed it. When she was not married in the past, this half-eldest sister was very disgusted with winemaking and never took the initiative to set foot in the wine shop. How could she have thought that she was married to the Huan family, and she was guarding it? Could it be that Wu Mingjing's uniqueness was discovered in that wine shop? The more he thought about it, the more he was frustrated. Zhou Yujin clenched fists with both hands, his nails stubbornly grabbing the soft flesh of his palm. A figure walked in from outside and saw the lady. The maid hurriedly leaned over to salute, and then exited the bedroom. Why is Yujin worried? It's better to talk to your mother, maybe I can help you figure out a way. Fan Lan is Zhou Yujin's biological mother and Zhou Xiaotong's second wife. It's 35 this year. But she is very well maintained, and she still looks like a 27 beautiful woman. In front of her biological mother, Zhou Yujin didn't have to lie. She took Fan Lan's hand, and Peach Blossom's eyes were full of grievances, and she choked up. My daughter heard from her grandfather when she was a child that there is a well in the Huan's family. That's a good virtue, but I don't have any precious treasures. It's better to sell the wine shop to Zhou's family and let my daughter take care of it, so as not to be violent. You have also saved a lot of private money over the years, so you just bought the wine shop. Fan Lan took Jinpsa to wipe her tears. Do you think I don't want to? My daughter asked the neighbor of the Huan family to make peace with the woman. 200 taels of silver is already a lot. Huan's mother was clearly moved, but Jolien had to stop her. With her mother-in-law, Huan Mu didn't let Huan Mu sell the wine shop. I thought she didn't think she had enough money, so she added 100 li of silver, but she didn't expect it. Do you think Jolien knows the effect of the Wuming well that will hinder every possible way? Fan Lan came out of the general's mansion anyway. Although she was a concubine, she had a much higher vision than Zhou Yujin. She sighed and said, "Silly girl, if you don't increase the price, Jolien probably won't even think about it. If you acted so eagerly, she would definitely be able to detect something wrong, either sitting on the floor and raising the price, or she refused to die." Hearing this, Zhou Yujin had tears in her eyes and asked, "What should the daughter do? Wu Mingjing is really important." "Yujin, don't worry, I will call Jolien over tomorrow, and she will have her own way. Just went to the warehouse to check it out in the rain." Jolien's clothes were dampened by the rain again. Now it's late spring. Although the temperature is not low during the day, some coolness seeps in at night. If you don't prevent it, you will catch the wind and cold. Finally had a chance to live again, Jolien would never make a joke about her body. She walked to the edge of the cutting board, cut the green onion and into filaments, cooked them in a porcelain pot, and put them in 2 bowls respectively. On the table, Wen said, "Uncle, drink some green onion and water first to avoid catching a cold." Originally, Huan Shen didn't want to appreciate it, but he stretched out his hand without hitting the smiling face, and met the woman's implicitly worried look. Somehow, those words of refusal were choked in his throat, and he couldn't say it anyway. Feeling aggrieved in his heart, he frowned and raised the thick porcelain bowl, pouring into his mouth. Seeing the young man's bold movements, Jolien's scalp was numb and he asked tremblingly, "Isn't it hot when I just got out of the pot?" The soup was naturally hot, and Huan Shen's mouth was swelling and hot, as if thin needles were poking on the soft flesh, causing bouts of pain, but he didn't want to show it, so he resisted without saying a word. The young man stood up quickly and walked to the room without looking back. Jolien hurriedly followed, and his little hand grabbed his cuff. And many more. Huan Shen was impatient, but saw the woman scooped cold water from the jar and said, "Let's drool, it won't hurt as much as it cools." Dense beads of sweat ooze from his forehead, one can imagine how difficult the pain is. Seeing that he doesn't move, Jolien continues to persuade him, "My uncle came to the wine shop to look at me, if I can't even take care of myself." "Okay, how can you achieve your goal? You will be on duty with Shang Guan tomorrow. If your mouth is full of blood blisters when you open your mouth, I am afraid that people will ridicule." The wooden scoop in his hand was snatched away. Jolien was not annoyed. He smiled and looked at the young man close at hand. After he rinsed his mouth with cold water several times, he asked with concern, "Does it still hurt?" Huan Shen couldn't help feeling a little embarrassed. The black eyes were icy, especially shocking, but there was a thin red at the base of his ears. Fortunately, only an oil lamp was lit in the kitchen and the light was dim. Otherwise, if Zhou's embarrassed appearance had been affected by Zhou's in the eyes, his face was lost. The young man shook his head and left the kitchen without saying a word, without any clues on his face. The rainwater on her body is a little sticky. Zhou never treats herself badly. Before going to bed, she specially boiled hot water, poured it into a wooden bucket with a basin, and scrubbed her body clean with saponaria. Because of tossing for a long time, she slept late and got up late the next day. When she left the room, there was no one else in the wine shop. It was estimated that Huan Shen had already gone out and went to the government as a errand. Thinking of the bluestone slab shattered by thunder last night, Zhou walked to the door of the warehouse, knelt down, and gently brushed his fingers across the gravel on the floor. God didn't split this or that, but it just ruined the bluestone slab covering the well. Is it to remind yourself? Zhou was not superstitious in the past, but after returning from the dead, she was in awe of those mysterious powers. After thinking for a moment, she fetched the water with a wooden bucket. As soon as the clear water of the well appeared in her sight, Zhou couldn't wait to take a scoop, bowed her head and tasted it. In the last life, Zhou had searched for famous springs near Peiping to make wine, but it was a pity that the springs were either exhausted or not luscious enough, which made her a great regret. Now that she tasted the water from the nameless well in front of her, she felt that a refreshing taste filled her mouth, completely opening her taste buds, as if she was not in a market at this moment, but in a lush mountain forest. The clearness and sweetness were extremely sweet. T. Saint Luu will certainly be full of praise here. Putting down the gourd scoop in his hand, Zhou closed his eyes and recollected. No wonder the Zhou family was willing to buy 300 taels of silver to buy the wine shop. Maybe they knew the uniqueness of this well for a long time, so they were so impatient. Just as she was wondering how to use well water to make wine, Huan Mu and Uncle Fu stepped into the gate of the wine shop. When they saw their daughter-in-law, Huan Mu hurried forward and asked, "Last night, Mrs. Lien stayed in the wine shop and she slept well." "Stable," Zhou said in his heart, without Huan Shen, she would be more comfortable. But in front of her mother-in-law, she couldn't say bad things about her uncle, she just smiled and nodded, looking extraordinarily supple. In the morning, Zhou followed Huan Mu to sell wine in the front hall. There were still not many customers. Sometimes there were no people in sight for a long time. After all, the dirty mash tasted ordinary, and ordinary people could brew it at home. Why waste money here? With yesterday's experience, Zhou has been mentally prepared. Even if the business is deserted, she is not in a hurry. When there are guests, she will be gentle on drinking. If there are no guests, simply go to the warehouse to see the cubing to avoid getting damp. Soaked in Maiyuzai, affecting music making. When the sun goes down, the store will be closed soon. Suddenly a middle-aged man walked to the entrance of the wine shop. This man was in his early 30s. He looked very gentle, dressed in light blue silk and satin clothes, and walked by without hesitation. Threshold. Hearing the movement, Zhou raised his head and glanced up, and also recognized his identity: Miaoping, the former chief of Huan's restaurant. Seeing Huan Mu's pale face and red eyes, she couldn't help feeling a little distressed, and asked in a cold tone, "I wonder if Mr. Miao is coming here. What is it for you?" "You now have the shares of Zwajia Winery, which can be regarded as Bianzhou City. There are wealthy people with a face, and nobles step on the ground, are they not afraid of dirty shoes? The Zhoujia distillery is doing well, and Miaoping also has a credit for it. He has experienced many ups and downs over the years." Although he was angry when he heard the run, he did not show the slightest clue on his face. He smiled and said, "Miss, Madam Jean, you have to go back to the house to discuss matters. Is it important?" Zhou pulled his lips, the ridicule in his eyes was almost unconcealed. The original body had been married to the Huan family for a full year. Whether it was 3 times to return to the door or Huan's mourning, Zhou Xiaotong and Fan Lan did not come forward. Seeing her is nothing more than the nameless well. There are a lot of things at home, I can't be too busy, please come back, Mr. Miao. Miao Ping really didn't expect that Zhou Lian would reject herself without hesitation. Even if the Fan clan was his step-family, not her biological mother, he was the wife of the Zhou family anyway, how could he be so contemptuous? Seeing the man's ugly face, Zhou Lian could guess his thoughts, and said indifferently, "Thank you, Miao Guan, tell your master, we will not sell the wine shop. No matter how much money the Zhou family puts out, there are only 2 words not to sell." Rao is Miao Ping, who has a city government, and he was so angry that he sneered, "Miss, you are still young, and you don't understand what it means to be a person, and you will see each other well in the future." But Mrs. Huan has lived for so many years, she must be very clear in her heart that the Huan's wine shop is no longer in the past, and the rice wine brewed has no fragrance, and only the most inferior power can drink it. It is simply a waste of the efforts of Master Huan. Huan Mu has a weak personality and never argues with others. Hearing such words at this moment, the whole person was almost overwhelmed by guilt and despair. As Miao Ping said, she does not have the talent for making wine. Having been supporting the wine shop for so many years has not only dragged down her family, but also dragged down Uncle Fu. Yes, we have put a lot of effort on our father-in-law. Miao is not in charge. You climbed to Jeji just to repay the favor, and to do things for the Zhou family is also to repay the favor. At the moment, we are forced to sell the store for the purpose of repaying the favor. A beast, otherwise, how can such a ruthless, shameless evil be done? Miao Ping burst into flames and rushed forward, clasping the woman's shoulders with both hands. Unexpectedly, before he could do anything, a sharp pain deep in his bones came from his wrist. He slowly turned his head and found that Huan Shen did not know when he had returned to the wine shop. The dark eyes were full of heavy killing intent, as if he had been caught. Pouring a basin of ice water on his head, Miao Ping suddenly became sober. He resisted the pain and said with a shy face, "Huan Shen, you let me go first, if you have something to say." Before Miao Ping could finish speaking, the young man's fist fell on his face, loosening his teeth and bleeding from the corners of his mouth. At this moment, Miao Ping finally knew that he was afraid, and he was about to run out when he let go, but he was caught by Huan Shen's back collar and kicked him to the ground with one foot, unable to get up. Seeing the young man's palm covering the hilt of the knife, Zhou Lian's eyelids twitched, and he hurriedly took his arm, exhorted softly, "Don't make things worse." Huan Shen is the Lord Zhenguo in the script, the only male in the Huan family, and the support of Yun Niang. He can't be delayed by such a brazen villain. The more Zhou Lian thinks, the more he panics, and he uses his strength. It's bigger, with obvious worry on his face. "I have my own measures," the man replied in a low voice, gently pulling Zhou Lian's hand away, and walking to Miao Ping. "My father saved your life. If you still dare to make trouble in Huan's house, I don't mind to collect the debt you owed." Huan Shen looks very handsome, but at this moment it is in the eyes of Miao Ping. He is afraid that he is no different from the evil spirits in hell. Roll. Hearing this, Miao Ping felt like a pardon, and rushed outside. The previous gentle and elegant appearance was completely embarrassed. As soon as the person left, Zhou Lian couldn't stretch any more. She fell to the ground as if she was drained, her hands covering her chest, and she couldn't help gasping. Huan Shen looked at her condescendingly, with a trace of complexity in her black eyes. "Get up." His voice was cold. Zhou Lian waved his hand, "I'll rest for a while, you leave me alone. Didn't you have the ability just now? You, a woman, can only be stubborn. If you really irritate Miao Ping and he does it, what benefit can you get?" The crimson lips were pressed into a line, Zhou Yan held a fire in her stomach, and she didn't say a word. She wanted to wait for Huan Shen to leave before standing up, but she couldn't prevent her wrists from being held tightly by the man, and she abruptly fell from the ground. Drag it up! Huan Shen, grow up in an orderly manner. Zhou Lian wanted to get rid of this person's restraint, but there was already a huge difference between men and women. Huan Shen had practiced martial arts for many years, and she couldn't match it. In the end, she was so tired that she was panting and flushed the corners of her eyes. Huan Shen squinted her eyes, and felt that Zhou's family was not the same as before. In the past, even though her relationship with Zhou's family was not close, she didn't dare to treat Miao Ping, who was in charge, even in order to get more money. Will deliberately please Miao Ping, but I didn't hesitate to ridicule just now, maybe it was just a play. The more I thought about it, the more I realized it was possible. Huan Shen looked cold and determined that he had been deceived again. Pushed away suddenly, Zhou Lian staggered back again and again. If she hadn't held the corner of the table in time, she would have fallen to the ground. She raised her head angrily, just to meet the scrutinizing eyes of the young man, and she made a creak in her heart. Did Huan Shen find that he was different from the original? No, it shouldn't. Huan Shen was very disgusted with the original body. For more than a year, they hadn't said 10 words, let alone understood. Even though he comforted himself so much, Zhou Lian still had a guilty conscience, and his expression was not very natural. Huan Mu stood by, fearing that the two uncles and sister-in-law would argue, and hurriedly ended the battle. Shener, if you have something to say, don't scare Lian Niang. Mother, rest assured, my sister-in-law is much bolder than ordinary people, otherwise how dare to argue with Miao Ping? She definitely has something to rely on. Huan Shen smiled. Zhou Lian didn't know what she had done wrong again, so she sighed secretly, but felt that the Zhenqiu public committee in the script was really gloomy and elusive. While rubbing her sore wrist, she walked to Huan's mother and said softly, "Mother, I miss Yuner. I will go home with you later, and come back tomorrow." Huan Yun was frail since she was young, and her blood and qi were deficient. Huan's mother wanted to take care of her daughter, but she was dragged down by the wine shop. She didn't have so much energy that the little girl grew up to 10 years old and looked like 8 or 9 years old. Thin and small, thinking about her ending in the script, Zhou Lian's heart burst into pain, and her face paled a little. When she went to the drugstore last time, she bought more Chinese angelica and astragalus medicinal materials, and stewed them in a pot with chicken, which can also supplement Yuniang. Thinking about it this way, Zhou Lian went back to the room and took the medicine packet and the copper plate, and walked out after Huan Mu. "Uncle, the wine shop will not open fire tonight, you can go back with us." After speaking, the woman turned her head back. Huan Shen's eyes grew deeper and deeper, and he did not refuse. After all, the reason why he came here was mainly to stare at Zhou Shi, not to guard the door of the wine shop. On the way home, he just passed the main street. Zhou Lian chose a sturdy chicken. Just as he was about to pay, his wrist was caught. Huan Mu said distressedly, "There are still a lot of vegetables at home, so buy another chicken. We can't finish it either. You have been working hard enough in the store every day. Yuner is still weak. She takes advantage of her young age to make up for it. After a few years, she will become strong and must eat something good." Although Zhou Lian does not have a lot of money, but she was unwilling to treat her family badly. Anyway, after the Xiang Chuan Chu was finished, the business of the wine shop would definitely pick up, so she didn't have to worry too much. Hearing this, Huan Mu couldn't refute, and she wondered how to supplement her daughter-in-law and don't let her lose herself. As soon as he walked to the door, Zhou Lian saw the bare courtyard, his eyes flashed, and he placed the chick on the ground, holding Huan Mu's arm, and asked softly, "Mother, can I plant a few trees in our house?" "Peach? Planting a peach tree? Even if it takes several years to bear fruit?" Huan Mu hesitated. Don't worry, I will go up the mountain to dig saplings in 2 days, and then bring some old soil back. As long as I can grow alive, I will be able to bear fruit. Jolien not only wants to plant peach trees, but also plans to plant a few plum trees. Soaking plum wine when the flowers are declining, thinking about the very different luscious taste, she feels that her mouth and tongue are full of fluids. After entering the kitchen and rubbing the chicken's neck, Jolien began to pluck the chicken, cut off the internal organs and chicken feet, and then put the chicken into the clean porcelain pot. This stall of Angelica and astragalus has been sliced into thin slices, added with green onion and cooking wine, filled with water, first boiled with martial fire, and then simmered slowly. Before long, the smell of chicken soup slowly escaped from the kitchen. When Huan Yun smelled the scent, she guessed that it was her sister-in-law who was cooking. She rushed to the kitchen in a hurry. She was like a puppy, spinning around Jolien, muttering, "Sister-in-law is back. Yuner thought that you only cared about making wine and forgot about me." Squeezing the tip of the little girl's delicate nose, Jolien smiled lightly, and the tail of his eyes was slightly raised, with a trace of unspeakable charm. The look was completely different from the past. Huan Yun stared blankly and rubbed her eyes subconsciously. "For fear that I was wrong. There is a lot of dust in the kitchen. Could it be that there is dust in your eyes?" When confronted with Huan Yun, Jolien remembered the sister who blocked her gun. Even if he knew that they were two completely different people, this thought could not be changed. The little girl shook her head, her two thin arms wrapped around the woman's waist and exclaimed, "Is the sister-in-law thinner? The waist is really thin." As she said, the little hand was still measuring. The original body is a kind of plump beauty, but the real Jolien is slightly thin, and I don't know if it is her illusion. After coming to Dezhou, she finds that this body is changing day by day, becoming more and more like the Republic of China. She's self, maybe she thinks more about it, it's not necessarily true. Little mouth is so sweet, your second brother is back too, go out and rest. After the chicken soup was simmered, Jolien coldly mixed the bamboo shoots and fry the chicken blood and cornel together. Although the dishes are not rich, they look very good. They are red, white, and yellow, with rich sweetness. Wei, Huan Yun couldn't help but admire her before she even approached. After she tasted the chicken soup while it was hot, her slightly pale face turned red and her eyes narrowed. While the Huan family was having dinner, Miao Ping returned to Zhou's house with a bruised nose and swollen nose. He walked to the hall and bowed to Fan Lan in salute. "Manager Miao, what's the matter?" Seeing the man's appearance, Fan Lan couldn't help but screamed. She stepped forward and looked at Miao Ping carefully, with obvious consternation on her face. Jolien did not agree to sell the wine shop, and did not want to go back to the house. The minion wanted to bring people here first, but Huan Shen suddenly appeared. He is a guard in the city, with great martial arts and great strength. But he ended up in an embarrassed manner. When he spoke, Miao Ping was very frustrated. At any rate, he was also the chief steward of the Zhuajia restaurant. On the way back, he was looked at by many long-time workers, and he might not be able to talk about himself behind the scenes. Zhou Yujin sat on the edge of the window lattice, frowning her fine eyebrows, and sighing with a sad expression on her delicate eyebrows. Seeing her daughter's head down, Fan Lan felt distressed beyond words. She squinted her eyes and said, "Tomorrow, I will go there in person." "Never, Jolien doesn't know the etiquette. If you suffer a loss, the slave really can't explain to the master." "What's the loss? I'm also her stepmother anyway. If she dared to be disrespectful to me, she committed an unforgivable crime. If she doesn't want her life, she can give it a try." In a blink of an eye, the next day, Jolien took a shovel and a soil basket, ready to go up the mountain to dig peach trees. Unexpectedly, before he walked out the door, he saw a group of people coming to the entrance of the wine shop. The leading pair of mother and daughter dressed in tender green, the tunic looked like two green onions, Jolien lowered his head and laughed sullenly. Sister, what are you laughing at? Zhou Yujin frowned and asked. She hasn't met Jolien for almost a year. When I saw it today, this woman changed her appearance. Her facial features became more and more brilliant. Even if she wore crudely crafted robes, she still couldn't move her eyes. It was obvious that she married into Huan's family. It's hard to suffer, how can I get over it? I am happy to see my mother and sister. Isn't it enough to smile? Jolien threw the earth basket on the ground, weighing Fan Lan, and asked, My mother sent me out to look for me. I don't know why. Feeling the woman's contemptuous attitude, Fan Lan didn't intend to sell her off, and said directly, Do you know where your mother is? Jolien's expression instantly darkened. The original mother's surname was Chu, and she married Zhou Xiaotong for 3 years before giving birth to a daughter. At first, Chu's family was quite healthy. Later, the original grandfather became addicted to gambling and ruined all the family property. He probably couldn't bear it. Assaulted, the Chu family had an affair with the family member in the house, and was finally expelled from the house and disappeared. At this moment, Jolien's chest seemed to be burning with anger. She stretched out her hand to cover her chest and understood that this was the emotion of the original body. She was angry and unwilling, but could not do anything. Upon seeing this, Fan Lan's eyes flashed with pride. Jolien had been thinking about Chu family since he was a child, and now he heard the news of that woman, he would definitely be shaken. She decided to strike while the iron was hot, and simply continued to persuade, as long as you sell the wine shop to Zhou's family, I will naturally tell you the whereabouts of Chu's family. If you disagree, you don't need to see her anymore. People, it's better to sever the relationship completely. You are a widow, and there are many disputes in front of the door, so you can never cause trouble to the upper body again. The woman calmed down her mood slowly, and at the same time recalled the contents of the storybook. The original body has done many wrong things throughout his life. He has poisoned my uncle, pushed my aunt into the fire pit, and even stole the prescription that his birth mother regarded as the most precious medicine. He wanted to make his own medicinal wine, but was deceived. Several extremely precious matching sets fell into the hands of the heroine Fan Zejun. After sorting out the memories in her mind, Jolien already knew where the Chu family was staying. Her eyes narrowed slightly and her face was expressionless. Me, there is no need to meet. Fan Lan finally changed her face. She never expected that Jolien would be so cruel, she was simply a beast that the 6 relatives did not recognize. You don't know how to make wine. What's the use of holding this wine shop? Zhou Yujin asked with wide eyes and hate. Jolien didn't even glance at her, his tone was very indifferent, what you want is not the wine shop, but the inside, shut up. Before she could finish speaking, Zhou Yujin hurriedly interrupted. There are still a lot of people passing by. If the Wu Mingjing incident is spread, many people will come to it. Zhou Yujin wants to get the Wu Mingjing in her dream, so why would she ask for trouble?